Northrop's YF-23 Black Widow has grown into something of a legend in recent years, as the only fighter to ever truly give the F-22 Raptor, or at least its prototype, a legitimate run for its money, scoring extremely high marks in the Advanced Tactical Fighter competition of 1990 that would ultimately result in the world's first fifth-generation fighter. The YF-23 performed so well that many today see it as maybe the biggest missed opportunity in American air power history, with the YF-22 ultimately securing a production contract that, in the 35 years since, has manifested into something of a skunkworks monopoly on American stealth fighter production. In memes and Reddit posts dating back years, you'll find YF-23 lovers emphasizing the fighter's superior stealth, greater fuel range, and aerobatic performance that was deemed largely similar to the YF-22's, despite a less complex engine design. You'll find memes about how the YF-23 should be put into production today, and even people suggesting that it should be the basis for the Navy's currently in development 6th-generation fighter, maturing under the name FAXX. Heck, I'm sure I've even shared a YF-23 meme or two over the years because, well, it was an objectively incredible jet. But was it really as good as our rose-tinted optics and nostalgic hindsight suggests? Could it really have been better than today's reigning king of the skies, the F-22 Raptor, if it had been chosen instead? And maybe more importantly, was Northrop really screwed out of what may have been the most lucrative fighter contract of the modern era? Or is the YF-23 hype train just another product of the internet hyperbole machine, grinding the same hot takes into meme after meme until all the nuances crumbled away and all we're left with is little more than a caricature of reality? The truth is, maybe a bit of both, but in the broadest sense, a world with F-23s prowling the skies wouldn't actually look much different at all. So let's talk about Northrop's YF-23, why it never went into production, and why America would still be facing the very same challenges today, even if it had. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power.
Fox 1.
Famed Marine General James Mattis once said that no enemy has done more harm to the U.S. military than unpredictable funding. But Congress has yet to learn that lesson, so this week, yet another round of Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force leaders called on Congress to pass an actual budget, as the stopgap funding bills Congress keeps using to avoid a government shutdown once again are having a deeply negative impact on the cost of ongoing programs, on troop readiness, and on force-wide modernization efforts. And I've been staying on top of all of this thanks to Ground News. Ground News is an aggregator that collects articles published by news outlets all around the world and places them all into a single, easy-to-read feed, making it simpler than ever to not just stay on top of what's going on in the world, but also to peer through the veil of bias that's so common in modern news media. Right here on Ground News, I can see that only 9 outlets have covered this story so far, and you can really see an imbalance in coverage between left and right-leaning outlets, with just 3 left-leaning outlets covering this story, and no right-leaning ones following suit just yet. Now, this is something I've seen in real time over my years as a journalist. Despite how incredibly important the budget is, discussions about it tend to be, well, pretty dry and technical. Accounting debates rarely make for viral headlines, and in our attention-based media market, virality tends to be prized over substance. And aside from keeping me informed, Ground News also makes these real concerns I have about modern media a lot easier to spot and quantify. Ground News also shows you vital information about each outlet, along with the headlines, like their political bias, factuality rating, corporate ownership, or government affiliations. And I love the Ground News blind spot feature that shows me news stories like this one that are getting attention in one political sphere, but not in the other. It helps me make sure I'm keeping my media intake balanced. Ground News is a big part of my research, and my day-to-day news consumption, and it can be for you too. Just go to ground.news/sandboxx with 2 X's, or just follow the link in the description below to get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use every day. Again, that's ground.news/sandboxx to get 40% off their Vantage plan that'll help you stay on top of things. Despite a design lineage that dates all the way back into the 1980s, Lockheed Martin's F-22 Raptor remains the world's most dominant air superiority fighter, thanks to an unmatched combination of 20th century brute force performance and distinctly 21st century stealth and sensor-fusing avionics. Since entering service 2 decades ago as the world's first true stealth fighter, the Raptor has been joined in the elite 5th generation fraternity by only 3 other in-service jets: Lockheed Martin's own F-35, China's Chengdu J-20, and Russia's Sukhoi Su-57. Despite each of these fighters working their way into production years after the Raptor, to date, no aircraft boasts a broader combination of air combat capabilities, especially as brought to bear within the broader American air power apparatus. In a world where fighter designs were largely built around a knife-fighting philosophy of fairly close quarters aerobatics, the Raptor emerged as a sniper, a hunter, capable of stalking its prey from dozens of miles out, hidden behind a cloak of altitude and technology until delivering a 44-pound high-explosive warhead in the form of one of 6 AIM-120 AMRAAMs it keeps tucked away inside its fuselage. Today, the F-22 remains so dominant that news outlets the world over run hyperbolic headlines anytime another fighter manages to take one down in air combat exercises, often intentionally leaving out the handicaps placed on the Raptor to make the fight feasible in the first place. But even with one wing tied behind the F-22's back, beating a Raptor remains headline news. And in a world that's seen 80 years of relative peace between global powers, you know a fighter's good when news outlets build entire feature articles around a single training victory against it. But despite the F-22's 2-decade-spanning dominance, there was one fighter that gave it a legitimate run for its money. An aircraft said to be even smaller on adversary radar scopes, that could fly even further into hotly contested airspace, and that could damn near match the Raptor's thrust vectoring agility without the use of costly thrust vectoring engine nozzles. This fighter, of course, isn't Russia's bargain bin felon, nor is it even China's still-in-the-works J-35. In fact, it isn't even the Raptor's own younger sibling, the more attack-focused F-35. No, the one jet that could have taken the crown from America's F-22 was also metaphorically the Raptor's first air-to-air kill: Northrop's YF-23. Now, in many ways, the YF-23's development mirrored that of the YF-22, with the Air Force eyeing the emergence of the Soviet Su-27 and MiG-29 as potential threats to American air supremacy starting in the late 70s, leading to the establishment of a classified air superiority fighter program starting in 1981, dubbed Senior Sky. Now, this new fighter, the Air Force stipulated, needed to be able to supercruise, or fly at supersonic speeds without the use of its afterburners. It needed to carry advanced and integrated avionics, and in a groundbreaking development at the time, it needed to incorporate low observability, or stealth, to be survivable in contested airspace. Now, at this point, Lockheed's F-117 Nighthawk was still 2 years away from secretly entering service. And while the Nighthawk was informally dubbed a stealth fighter, the F-117 was no fighter at all. With no onboard radar, subsonic performance, limited aerobatic capabilities, and no air-to-air weapons to speak of, America's original stealth fighter was actually a highly secretive attack aircraft developed specifically for high-risk air-to-ground mission sets. Now, according to General Robert J. Dixon, who served at Tactical Air Command at the time, that highly classified jet was dubbed a stealth fighter specifically to attract hotshot pilots who probably wouldn't apply to join a classified attack jet program. But this new jet wouldn't just be a real stealth fighter, it would represent a step change in the way global powers perceived the offensive counter-air mission set. This new stealth fighter would be coupled with powerful new engines, being developed solely for high-performance stealth applications. It would carry a new radar array, even more powerful than the current world-leading F-14 Tomcat, and would engage enemy aircraft from beyond visual range using America's newest and most potent airborne weapon, the AIM-120, Advanced Medium Range Air-to-Air Missile, which was set to enter service in late 1991. Collectively, these systems, and a long list of others, would give America's new stealth fighter first shot opportunity, or the ability to engage adversary aircraft before they even knew it was there, marking a massive shift away from the close quarters dogfights of past eras. At the time, these aircraft were expected to operate out of Eastern European airstrips, penetrating into Soviet airspace to engage fighters and establish air superiority over the battlefields of World War III. And that is an important factor to note because it didn't require the same sort of long operational ranges that American fighter designs now prioritize for long missions over the open Pacific. Now, Northrop had been a pacing threat for Lockheed Skunk Works in the stealth arena right from the start, securing their own contract to field America's first true stealth bomber, known today as the B-2 Spirit, in October of 1981. Unlike Lockheed's angular and faceted Nighthawk, Northrop leaned harder into a smooth, blended design with both the B-2 and its new YF-23. Now, this benefited both aerodynamics and, with careful calculation, the aircraft's radar return, ultimately producing a fighter design that was reportedly even smaller than the YF-22 on radar, and that is a significant claim considering the F-22 Raptor entered service with a reported 0.0001 square meter radar cross-section. That's roughly the size of a single marble. In terms of fighter designs, Northrop's YF-23 was, well, downright alien-looking, with large diamond-shaped wings that offered more than 3 times the wing area of an F-16. An all-moving V-tail with massive control surfaces to improve aerobatic performance, and a pronounced duck bill ahead of the cockpit. The air intakes were mounted below and offset to the engines themselves, using what Northrop engineers called sinuous ducts at the time to prevent incoming radar waves from reaching the highly reflective engines themselves. On the bottom of the aircraft, a single large weapons bay was meant to house an internal payload of 4 new AIM-120 AMRAAMs and another 2 infrared-guided or heat-seeking AIM-9 Sidewinders for close-quarters fights. On the rear of the aircraft, the YF-23's 2 powerful turbofan engines exhausted through heat-abating troughs that mixed the outflow of thrust with cooler engine bleed air to further limit infrared or heat detection. And as Northrop test pilot Jim Sandberg would later recount, that active heat management also helped to, well, prevent the fighter from burning off its own tail under afterburner because those jet outlets were well forward of the rearmost point of the aircraft. Now, the use of these types of exhaust outlets may have improved stealth, but they also came at the expense of the dynamic thrust vectoring capabilities found in its YF-22 competitor. But Northrop reportedly overcame a great deal of that maneuverability handicap through the use of that massive V-tail and its rudder vaders, each of which was larger than the wing of Northrop's F-5. And today, they look an awful lot like the tail design found on Europe's proposed Tempest fighter. As another tertiary benefit of that unique tail shape, this also allows for excellent visibility behind the aircraft, something that's pretty tough to come by with a conventional standing vertical tail. Now, the first YF-23 prototype, dubbed PAV-1, made its debut flight on August 27, 1990, powered by Pratt & Whitney's experimental new F-119 turbofan engines. As the aircraft took off and pulled away under military power, meaning without using its afterburners, the F-16 chase plane assigned to keep an eye on it was forced to lean into its afterburner just to keep up. 2 months later, the second prototype, dubbed PAV-2, powered instead by GE power plants, began flight testing as well. And just 82 days later, on December 18th, that second YF-23 prototype would complete the platform's final flight test, with the 2 jets accumulating a total of 50 flights and about 65.2 total flight hours throughout the entire regime. Now, that was, admittedly, 300 fewer test sorties than were originally planned, but development delays forced an abbreviated testing schedule, and the aircraft performed well enough in that short window of time to prove that it had legitimate chops. Aside from some early technical issues with PAV-2 and multiple windscreen failures, these YF-23 test flights demonstrated conclusively that the aircraft met all of the requirements laid out by the Air Force, while also outperforming Lockheed's YF-22 in a few pretty important metrics, specifically in its radar return and unrefueled range of a reported 2,789 miles, which was about 489 miles further than the YF-22 could boast. According to some sources, the YF-23 could also supercruise at higher speeds, reaching Mach 1.72 versus the YF-22's Mach 1.58. But Lockheed's YF-22 was not only considered a bit more maneuverable thanks to its thrust-vectoring engine nozzles, but also demonstrated its ability to withstand higher G-loads, which may have been a product of better salesmanship rather than any YF-23 airframe limitations. Both jets offered similar thrust-to-weight ratios and payload capabilities, and 4 months later, on April 23, 1991, Secretary of the Air Force Donald Rice announced that Lockheed's YF-22 had been selected to serve as the basis for America's next air superiority fighter. And Pratt & Whitney's immensely powerful but simpler turbofan design would be the engine to power it. Now, if we look at the performance of these prototype fighters in a vacuum, it's pretty clear that neither jet was a bad choice. Both aircraft designs represented a massive leap in capability over even the most dominant jets of that era. Both aircraft designs met or exceeded the requirements laid out by the Air Force as necessary to dominate future battle spaces. To put it pretty bluntly, there just weren't any wrong answers for the Air Force in this competition. And while Northrop's YF-23 may have edged out the YF-22 in a few places, the true difference in combat capability between these platforms was, well, not particularly pronounced. The YF-22 did, however, secure one victory in one very important testing metric: actual test flights. While it also saw an abbreviated testing regime, Lockheed's two YF-22 demonstrators completed a total of 74 test flights, 24 more than Northrop, for a combined 91.6 hours in the sky, about 26.4 more hours than the YF-23. While these aircraft were pretty evenly matched across the board, the firms behind them weren't. Lockheed came out swinging during this flight testing regime, performing more aerobatic maneuvers and conducting flashy demonstrations of the YF-22's more mature capabilities at the time, like launching live weapons from inside its payload bay, something the YF-23 prototypes just couldn't do. The YF-22 also demonstrated its ability to fly at high angles of attack, even going so far as to have photographs taken while it did. Now, this was a capability the YF-23 did possess, but the Northrop team never thought to demonstrate it. Test pilot Paul Metz, the only man to fly both the YF-23 and a pre-production F-22, outlined how Lockheed won the presentation war in a speech that he delivered at the Western Museum of Flight back in 2015, emphasizing the high degree of capability delivered by the YF-23, while also highlighting Northrop's more engineer-centric approach to marketing the platform. I'll quote him now. There's another aspect to this competition. Not everyone who will look at your airplane or even be in a position to select your airplane will necessarily be an engineer, and they may not be astute technically. So there's another way to leave an impression. So I look back on that and said, I hope we learn our lesson, that sometimes there's showmanship as well as technical excellence, that you have to play the game. But importantly, Lockheed's understanding of how to put on a good show wasn't the only external factor working in their favor. As the Air Force puts it in its own account of the YF-23's history, the Air Force just had more confidence in Lockheed's ability to, quote, manage a fighter program of this scale and complexity. And that determination speaks directly to perceptions of Northrop at the time. You see, in early 1991, as the Air Force weighed its decision between these two fighters, Northrop was coming off the tail end of a long list of high-profile scandals and controversies that spanned the 2 decades before. In the 70s, Northrop was accused of illegal campaign contributions, bribing foreign officials for fighter contracts, and taking American lawmakers and defense officials on fully paid hunting trips to garner undue favor. In the 80s, Northrop was formally investigated for mismanagement related to both the MX missile and the B-2 Spirit programs, resulting in rampant cost overruns. In 1989, Northrop was indicted on criminal charges for falsifying test results on cruise missiles for the Air Force and Harrier components for the Marine Corps. And in February of 1990, just 6 months before the YF-23's first flight, Northrop pleaded guilty to 34 criminal fraud charges related to these 2 programs, and a plea deal that saw a whopping 141 other charges for fraud and conspiracy drop as a part of that agreement. To put it frankly, Northrop was politically radioactive at the time, and with costs continuing to rise on the B-2 Spirit, the Air Force was not confident that Northrop could deliver their fighter within the budget allowed. And they also knew that because of Northrop's reputation, any setback or cost overrun would be met with some very aggressive questions out of Congress. Now, these controversies didn't make it into any formal Air Force statements, but certainly played a role in the branch being more confident in Lockheed's ability to deliver this new fighter without significant turmoil. So, perceptions be damned. Was the YF-23 really the better fighter? Well, depending on your perspective, maybe it was. But even if it wasn't by much. The truth is, both aircraft were incredibly capable jets that could have gone on to become the basis for an entirely new generation of fighters, the 5th generation as we know it today. And like the F-22, a Northrop F-23 in service today would likely remain the most capable air superiority fighter in the world. Of course, the technologies developed for the F-22 went on to directly inform the design of Lockheed Martin's follow-up stealth fighter, the F-35, which now serves as the backbone of America's stealth air power and the backbone of many allied air forces. And it's tough to predict how the Joint Strike Fighter effort may have manifested in such an alternate timeline. But maybe most importantly, 11 months after the contract was awarded for America's new stealth fighter, the Soviet Union collapsed, suddenly leaving this great power competition program without a great power to compete against. And 10 years after that, the terror attacks of September 11th, 2001 would kick off the 2-decade-spanning global war on terror, a conflict against adversaries with no fighters to shoot down and no air defenses to defeat through stealth. The YF-23 wouldn't have stopped the fall of the Soviet Union, nor could it have prevented 9/11, and that means it would have seen the same dramatic cuts in that 2006 Quadrennial Defense Review that ultimately slashed the Raptor fleet down to just 186 jets to save money for counter-terror operations in the Middle East. And because America's F-23 fleet would have been just as small, or maybe even smaller if production ran into snags as the F-22 fleet is today, well, the Air Force would still be looking to field a replacement in the Next Generation Air Dominance program before its F-23 airframes aged out of service. The YF-23 had everything it needed to be a dominant air superiority fighter, but then so did the F-22. And while it is always fun to think about the what if that was Northrop's Black Widow 2, America certainly didn't lose out by choosing the Raptor. And with that ends yet another edition of Air Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and now merch from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below, and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.